Thank you, Dr. Bruce. On behalf of the Division of Diversity and Inclusion and the Office of Global Affairs, I'd like to welcome you all to this real talk about big questions. How can the Ohio University community stand with and support Asian Pacific Islander populations from ongoing discrimination and violence? Ohio University is an institution that strives to ensure every member of our Bobcat community feels welcomed and integrated. Through the Division of Diversity and Inclusion, Ohio clearly states that our vision is to celebrate all members of our university community and to broaden our collective understanding by uplifting diverse identities, cultures, experiences, and perspectives. We recognize that this requires a willingness to have hard conversations, to recognize and call out prejudice, to hear and respect vastly different points of view, and to do all this with civility and grace. Recent acts of violence against Asian and Pacific Islander populations, or API, including the tragedy in Atlanta in March, or numerous attacks on API populations throughout the pandemic, brought into very harsh light the injustice and discrimination that API communities have been facing. Unfortunately, the situation is not new. Anti-Asian hatred, from bold physical attacks to small comments and microaggressions, cannot be condoned, and the mindset that allow this injustice to occur must be addressed. Violence and discrimination are not acceptable, nor is our collective silence or ignorance. We, as a broader community, need to have these challenging opportunities to reflect and learn how to actively ally ourselves in support of Asian, Asian American, and Pacific Islander communities. It is important that all members of the society stand against hate and in support of our shared humanity as we walk together on the road to a more just society. We should all play a constructive role to bring and embrace diversity in our classrooms, our communities, and our workplaces, as diversity and equity and inclusion should be our strength. We are very grateful for your presence and participation today. The keynote and the following dialogues aim to open minds and hearts, foster connections, and provide critical insight and strategies to defend and support API communities. We're also very grateful for the support of our university leadership. With gratitude, I am pleased to welcome our president, Dr. M. Duane Nellis, to give us a few words. Dr. Nellis?
Yeah, thank you, Ji-Young, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today. Thanks for all of you joining us on this very, very important topic. I'd like to especially welcome our speaker, Helen Zia, who's with us today. Very distinguished person, and we're just so pleased to have her here. Ohio University is very proud to welcome students, faculty, and staff from around the world to our campus every year. Our Global Bobcats strengthen our classrooms, add to our campus environment, and help to make Ohio University the truly special place that it is today. Our diversity makes us stronger, and I say that over and over again. And I'm grateful for each member of our university community. We are all enriched by this diversity. And right now in America, though, we continue to see examples of discrimination against individuals from Asia and the Pacific Islands, as well as Asian Americans. We also see this in our own community, and we cannot allow this to happen. Ohio University is committed to providing a safe and inclusive home for all of our students, faculty, and staff. And we're dedicated to supporting our students, faculty, and staff from Asia and the Pacific Islands, as well as all of our Asian American individuals as part of our university family. And we'll continue to support all members of our community as we fight against systemic racism and oppression. And I'm very pleased that the Ohio University Board of Trustees recently affirmed the new Inclusive Excellence Strategic Plan. This plan will help us in our goal for promoting an atmosphere of understanding for all of our community members. At the same time, it's up to each of us to learn what we can do to help fight racism and support our students, our colleagues, and our neighbors. Today's event will help each of us to move forward, and I know that we will learn a great deal from the discussion. Many thanks again to the organizers of today's event, and again, thanks to everyone for being here. And now I'd like to invite back Ji Young. So Ji Young, welcome back. Thank you.
President Nellis. Next, I'd like to invite our mayor of the city of Athens, Dr. Steve Patterson. Mayor Patterson has lived in Athens for 22 years, working as an associate professor of health psychology at Ohio University, and has been serving as the mayor of Athens, Ohio since 2015. I thought it's been longer than that, but since 2015. Mayor Patterson has been a strong advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Athens community, and also highly supportive of the safety and well-being of our international student population. I am pleased to welcome Mayor Patterson.
Dr. Yang, sometimes it feels longer than 2016. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate having the opportunity to come and make some opening remarks to this amazing group and such an amazing keynote speaker. You know, when I look around at what has happened, what happened in Atlanta, and more recently hearing from our senior leadership for the state of Ohio referred to the virus as the Wuhan virus, and then more recently here in Athens, intentional or not, emails that can promote and cause fear within our Asian American Pacific Islander communities. I want you all to know that that's not tolerable in my mind. I just had a meeting this morning for the first time ever, pulling together the Black leaders of Athens County, and would like to reaffirm my desire to bring together a group called the Athens Asian American Pacific Islanders Group, a working group to where we'll meet quarterly, and likely even more frequent than that, to continue on our path, which is going to be a long journey, but a meaningful journey to where our community, regardless of where you come from, the color of your skin, the language that you speak, Athens is an inclusive and a diverse city, and I need your help for us to get there as we're on this journey together. So I am sharing with everybody in the chat my contact information. Please reach out to me, but I appreciate having the opportunity to speak. Thank you, Mary Nally, and everyone else. This is going to be a wonderful event. I just feel it in my bones, so thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Patterson, and thanks for your leadership and support. It is now my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Helen Zia. Helen is an activist, award-winning author, and former journalist. In 2000, her first book, Asian American Dreams, The Emergence of an American People, was a finalist for the prestigious Kiriyama Pacific Rim Book Prize. She also authored the story of Wen-Ho Lee in My Country versus Me, about the Los Alamos scientist who was falsely accused of being a spy for China in the worst case since the Rosenbergs. Helen's latest book is Last Boat Out of Shanghai, the epic story of the Chinese who fled Mao's revolution. Just launched in 2019, it traces the lives of immigrants and refugees from a time in history that has striking parallels to these difficulties facing migrants today. The daughter of immigrants from China, Helen has been outspoken on issues ranging from human rights and peace to women's rights and countering hate violence and homophobia. She is featured in the Academy Award nominated documentary, Who Killed Vincent Chin, and was profiled in Bill Moyers PBS series, Becoming American, The Chinese Experience. In 2008, Helen was a torchbearer in San Francisco for the Beijing Olympics. In 2010, she was a witness in the federal marriage equality case decided by the US Supreme Court. Helen received an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters from the University of San Francisco and an honorary Doctor of Laws from the City University of New York Law School for bringing important matters of law and civil rights into public view. She is a Fulbright Scholar and a graduate of Princeton University's first co-educational class. She attended medical school, but quit after completing 2 years. I'm kind of curious about that story. Then went to work as a construction laborer, an auto worker, and a community organizer, after which she discovered her life's work as a writer. Her groundbreaking articles, essays, and reviews have appeared in many publications and books, receiving numerous awards. After Helen's keynote, Dr. Li Jing Yang, Associate Professor of Counseling and Higher Education in Patton College of Education, will lead the Q&A session. Thank you, Helen, for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jang, for that very, very generous and kind introduction. And it's such an honor to be here. President Nellis, Mayor Patterson, and the whole Ohio University community. I'm really thrilled that you're having this conversation, and I understand that you have many of these real talk conversations about pressing issues facing everybody today. And so, so I'm really just hoping to talk about things that will help really inspire further conversations. So what I did was I prepared a PowerPoint to kind of go through some things that I think that, well, what I call missing in history, MIH, things about Asian Americans that really most people, most Americans, and even many Asian Americans, and certainly many of the international students from Asia and elsewhere have no idea about a very important and large community in the United States. And unfortunately, we see that the attention, it's taken a lot of pain this year, including mass killings and other deaths of Asian Americans to initiate, I think, a long overdue conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to begin a PowerPoint. I'm going to go over a lot of slides and try to go through quickly so that we have time for a lot of your questions. And so if I, skim over something and it raises a question for you, please make a note of it and be sure to ask. So I'm going to share my screen and go to the slideshow here. So here we go. And so I'm going to be talking about Asians and Asian Americans in the time of COVID and the challenges that we face here. These are my social media handles. I do have a website, so you can also contact me this way, even though I cannot promise that I will be quick in responding. So we are fighting dual pandemics today. A lot of people have talked about that, the pandemic of the virus itself, but also we've seen how the virus of racism has infected many of our communities. We just saw the end of a police killing of George Floyd. That trial just ended. And I think we could all breathe a sigh of relief, and the idea that finally there was some semblance of, if not justice, at least some accountability. But for Asian Americans, also, this has been a time of intense hate, prejudice, intolerance, whatever we want to call it. But, many Americans, and including the media, sort of say about halfway through 2020, like, oh, wow, this is happening to Asian Americans. And how about that, Asian people? Now you know what racism is like. Well, it wasn't in the middle of 2020. It wasn't in March when, there was a mass killing of Asian women in Atlanta. As early as December 2019, when the coronavirus was first identified in China, Asian American communities all across the country began feeling the sting of intense prejudice. Many Chinatowns virtually shut down. And even, now more than a year later, it's a question whether some of them will even survive. So, there are hate monitoring groups that have also noted that hate crimes against all marginalized people have increased tremendously. That includes intolerance based on religion, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic attacks have risen. And of course, with Islamophobia, that's been a continuation, that has been intense ever since 9/11, 2001. There have been a huge spike of homophobic and especially transphobic attacks against transgender people. And we see across the world that gender violence, domestic violence, all of those things have grown a lot. And so the virus has also created another virus of just frustration, misery. And so that has often taken the root of violence, unfortunately. So for Asian Americans and Asians in America, you know, by March 2020, there was, you'll remember that there were many social media postings of people saying what happened to them, videos that people were taking. And of course, that was, you know, greatly amplified because the White House, which, excuse me, but I call the white supremacy house of that time, was, you know, beating a constant drum about China, about blaming everything on China, all of the domestic woes of the US on China. And that created you know, an off the chart growth of attacks on children, on families, 2-to-1, women, Asian American and Asian women have been attacked. And we've all seen this, the pictures of elderly 80 and 90-year-old Asian people being pushed, knocked down, and even killed when they were merely going for a walk. And so we know that the numbers are vast because one website created by an Asian American nonprofit group has counted within 1 year more than 4,000 attacks. We know this is an incredible undercount because it's just one website, and you have to, you know, have access to the internet. You have to know that the website exists. And, you know, in general, we know that these counts, these numbers are an undercount because 4,000 to one website versus 200 to the federal government, you know, so, you know, law enforcement reports. So these are both very, you know, an indication of what's going on out there, that people trust community reporting more than calling law enforcement, for example. But we know it's just one website and that there's a lot more happening. And so, as I pointed out that it's elderly people, children, women, and really the most vulnerable people in our communities that have been feeling this sting. So that I wanted to begin as an overview of where we are, but I want to back up to what causes these attacks, what causes people to treat others as though they are less than human. And this applies across the board to, you know, any group that is subject to violence because of what they look like, what they worship, who they love. And for Asian Americans, you know, this begins in ways that don't necessarily rise to the level of violence, but there are things that are called microaggressions. And I would like to point out that micro does not mean small. Microaggressions, and even the name microaggressions, is based on economics, microeconomics and macroeconomics. Microeconomics are transactions economically that happen between individuals or small businesses. Macroeconomics are the large-scale global economics, things that countries and policies that happen. And so no economist would say that micro or macroeconomics is more important than the other. They go hand in hand. And so microaggressions and macroaggressions of institutional racism go hand in hand. So the kind of microaggressions that Asian Americans experience even come in the form of, what are you? Where are you from? No, where are you really from? And I've been experiencing this, and every Asian American really, for since I was a kid. I can't even count the number of times, you know, the thousands and thousands of times I've had the identical experience of, where are you from? And I say New Jersey because I was born and raised in New Jersey. And this could go on forever until it's like, no, where are you really from? And I'm really from New Jersey. And of course, I know that they want to know where my ancestors are from. And when I say, well, my parents are from China, if that's what you wanted to know, and where are you really from? the answer has 100% of the time been, well, I'm really from America. What do you mean? And the whole interchange is as though I cannot be from America. And that is one of the underlying microaggressions and assumptions about people who are have ancestry from Asia. It's that you can never belong to America. And what goes hand in hand with that is the idea that you are not only an alien, but you are an enemy, a potential enemy, untrustworthy. So I have pictures here to show that, well, you know, there is also no real way to assume that all people of Asian ancestry are the same, because, you know, just look on a globe. Asia is the largest continent with the vast, you know, the largest number of countries, cultures, languages, religions, and backgrounds. And so, yes, in America, we are all sort of lumped together in this way, and all assumed to be not belonging. So, you know, to the what are you question, of course, the answer is, well, we're human. That's what we are. And we are multidimensional because human beings are complex beings. Every one of us has more than one identity. Every one of us has many, many different ways that we are human. And on this picture, we have multiracial Asian Americans. We have transnational adopted Americans. We have, different non-conforming gendered Asian Americans, and we are all Asian American. We are all Asian descended, and we are all human and multidimensional. So this slide, please, it's there's a lot of detail on it. It's not to point out the numbers. It's really to show, and in fact, the numbers are out of date. It's really to show that there's really a lot of different countries and cultures and places that Asian American and Pacific Islanders are from. An updated list would be much larger than this, in fact. And here's another graph to sort of point to some of the other ways that we're lumped together. And one of the underlying assumptions of Asians in America is that we are all rich. We are all the model minority, which is a racist myth that says that we are all doing well, and not only doing well, doing great, better than almost all other Americans. And it's simply not true. There's a great wealth gap indeed among Asian Americans. And if you disaggregate, if you actually break it down and look at the particulars of the different Asian communities, for example, there is a great deal of poverty among Asian Americans. And there are some more vulnerable communities that, especially those that arrived in the US as refugees from war. And I point out that these wars were American wars in Asia. And so of the groups that have arrived because of with basically nothing, those communities continue to have very high poverty rates. And even among communities that have been well established for a long time, like Chinese, for example, the poverty rate is still pretty comparable to the overall American poverty rate. And yet these kind of things are just sort of swept under that all Asians are rich and all Asians are highly educated. Well, actually, then the percentage of Asians who have not completed high school in the US is also pretty high. And you wouldn't think that, for example, so again, we have the more vulnerable communities, but for even say Chinese, it's 23%. My own mother did not complete education past the 3rd grade. And I think a lot of our immigrant communities have stories like that to tell. So the idea is we cannot lump all of the Asian Americans together. That really we have to look under the surface because the stereotypes about us are so wrong. I don't mean for you to read this. I'm not going to talk the whole thing, but my point with this slide is there are many moments in Asian American history that are completely invisible and unknown to most of the American population, and that includes Asian Americans themselves, and certainly students and recent arrivals from Asia have no idea that, for example, we can track Asian American history to the 1500s. Really? I mean, that's a time that most people, it's like you wouldn't even think of that possibility. But how was that? How did that happen? Well, the Spanish galleon trade that went from Spain to the Philippines to the Caribbean also not only carried goods, but they carried people. And we know that the best navigators of the Pacific Ocean were Filipinos, were Polynesians, and many of those actually ended up arriving in North America. And so, for example, we have records that have been tracked in Spain, in the Spanish archives, that show, that there were letters from Spanish barbers in Mexico City who were complaining about Chinese barbers who were there because they said that Chinese barbers charged less and did better. Now, did better work. And so here we have, even in 1635, a dynamic that continues to this day. We have communities that have been tracked from 1765 in Louisiana. And I'd like to point out 1785, the Continental Congress, 1790, people from India, 1825, the first recorded birth of a Chinese American in New York City. The Civil War of the United States actually had hundreds of Asian and Pacific Islander soldiers. And we know this because the muster rolls said where their place of birth was. And then I just want to point out two laws that were passed. 1875, there was the first federal law to restrict immigration, because up until that time, US borders were porous and continued to be, except for Asians. And 1875, Congress passed the Page Act. What did the Page Act do? It banned immigration for Chinese women. And why was that? They said Chinese women were immoral, disease carriers, and all prostitutes. And so when in Atlanta, those 6 Asian American women were killed in that mass killing, and the killer actually sought out Asian businesses to attack. And when the sheriff said, oh, there's no way this has anything to do with race, he couldn't have been more wrong, because the whole notion of and stereotype, racialized stereotype of Asian women was precisely the idea of the Page Act in 1875. And that was rapidly followed by 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act that then banned immigration, highly restricted immigration to all Chinese to America. And
hi, Helen.
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. So your font size seems very small. Would you be able to?
Oh, I'm
explain?
sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I reduced
Thank
it.
you.
Yes. Let
No
me,
problem.
yes, you're right. I did that so I could see everything, but here we
Actually,
go.
Helen? Oh,
Go.
yeah. Okay.
Here we go. Thank you. I forgot that I needed to have the whole screen there. So let me just advance here. Thank you for telling me that, Dr. Yang. So anyway, what was happening in 1875, 1882? This was a period, these federal laws came at a time when there was actually ethnic cleansing going on in the United States, that all Asians in America were being driven out. They call it the Great Driving Out period. And so when we talk about this anti-Asian hate, that many people said, wow, I didn't know this could ever happen to Asian Americans. Actually, it is part of Asian American history. For Asians in America, it's like, no, we didn't just discover what racism is like. This is our entire history in America. And so Chinese to America became the first illegal Americans, because prior to that, there was nobody who was considered to be illegal or undocumented. It was Chinese. And then that was extended to all Asians in America over time. So then any Asians from any country in Asia or in the Pacific Islands were also highly restricted from coming to America. And the other thing that these laws did was they made it not possible for these immigrants, anybody from Asia, to become American citizens. And what did that mean? That means they couldn't become a citizen, they couldn't vote, they couldn't run for office, they couldn't have a voice in America. And so when people say, you know, why is it that Asian communities are so quiet in America? It's not because of culture. I mean, because we know if we look at Asia, you know, people in Asia have fist fights in their legislatures. They have huge demonstrations and resistance, and we can look at what's going on in Hong Kong or Myanmar or any number of Asian countries at any time. So it's not Asian culture. It's really this enforced silence and invisibility. And we know that, you know, going forward, that every Japanese American on the West Coast of America was incarcerated during World War II for the entire war, not knowing what was going to happen to them, not knowing whether they were going to be executed the way Jews in Europe were. So this is just a quick snapshot of our history. I'm going to power through this now to just say that, you know, it's not just that people don't know this history, that it's invisible. And so there's a blank slate in people's minds that in between their ears, it's like there's nothing. In fact, what is in there is the poison that every one of us consumes from childhood. The minute we start seeing media, that there are images. And so I'm going to just name 3 basic images, and that's the gooks, geishas, and geeks. And yes, I know that gooks is a racial slur, but what it means is it's part of the master narrative of America, that there is a yellow peril, that all Asians are un-American, and not only that, but are enemies. And so we just see multiple images all over the place, whether it's in the media, whether it's in video games. And here's a cover of Time magazine that says the next Cold War out of a red star. It's obvious that this is China being here. And this is a cover from 1997. It could very easily be today, because this is the view that China and everything from China, including Chinese, are ultimately an enemy to the United States. So I'm going to break this down a little bit. The geeks, well, we know what the geeks are. The geeks are the model minority. The geeks are the ones who are called in the middle of the night to solve a problem, to answer a question, because they work so hard and they never complain. And so one of these images here, you know, so many media images of Asians in America are what's called yellow face. They are not Asian people. They are grotesquely made up people who are the imagination of what somebody from Asia would be. And then there are many movies that depict Asians, and this is an Asian teenager. It's a story of, you know, 16 Candles, a 16-year-old in a high school where the most despicable, the most humiliating person in there is an Asian American boy. And so we have this as the geeks. And I say that today, even though we know the railroad workers who built the hardest part of the railroads through the Rocky Mountains were considered and called coolies, that today, if you combine gooks and geeks, what we end up with are what I call high-tech coolies, the ones who do all the work, get none of the credit, get no promotion, nothing viewed as potentially being leaders, whether it's to be their supervisor in their unit or anything like that. And these are real people. So what we have today are some of these high-tech coolies that are also, because of the being seen as not trustworthy, always suspicious, always potentially a threat to national security. We have many Asian American scientists, doctors, people in business who are being accused, falsely accused, of being spies in America. And these are 2 individuals whose careers were ruined and who are still fighting the false accusations. You can look them up and you can see why I say they are false. The charges were ultimately dismissed, and there are many, many cases like that. And unfortunately, our universities And even our schools and businesses are being asked to assist the government in surveilling people. And there is a gender component to this too. So for women, I talked earlier about Atlanta and how false it was to say this had nothing to do with race. This first slide in the upper left-hand corner is 100 years old. This is Anna May Wong, the very first Asian American movie star. She was always restricted to roles of playing the temptress, the exotic female who was also evil and an enemy. And the other side of that is the geek, the model minority Asian woman whose only purpose in life is to please a man. She's passive. She doesn't ever complain. She's compliant. And in most Hollywood depictions, it's not only is it a man, it's always a white man. And when she can't really have that love reciprocated to her, because of course she is only Asian, she kills herself. And that is a theme over and over again. But these are old pictures, right? You fast forward it to Lucy Liu, to movies that are coming out today, and look, it's exactly the same portrayal. There's no difference. Here she is, the same thing. And so we see a continuation of this whole idea. And I do want to say that, this is based in Asia too, where these stereotypes come from. Look at US troop force in Asia. This is, just a short summary slide, but where every one of these locations there is also, the R&R and entertainment. And this is where, the vast majority of American GIs might meet their first Asian woman. And in Asia, R&R, the slang for that is rape and run. And we know that many Asian countries and locations, there's a lot of protest about how the women are viewed and treated and the abuse that they receive. So the thing about it is geishas in the workforce too, the idea that Asian women are attractive, sexually exotic, hypersexual, and submissive, compliant, will not fight back to a predator that makes for the perfect victim. And so I'm going over this. I think, all of you students really need to be aware of these things because these are the predominant stereotypes. And you can see that many of the lawsuits that, name lawsuits that have been brought forth in America are by Asian women in the workforce. So there has been a long history of anti-Asian racism. Here's just a few pictures. Vincent Chin case that was mentioned earlier. I was in Detroit at a time when there was a great hatred, not toward China, but to Japan. And so Japan, you can see in this poster, Japan was the enemy. It was viewed as Japan was, at war with America. America was at war with Japan. And so at that time of anti-Japanese, anti-Asian hate, a Chinese American was killed named Vincent Chin. And out of that came a large outcry by Asian Americans who very much like today felt that we all had a target on our backs. At that time in the 1980s of anti-Asian hate, a Chinese man named Vincent Chin was killed, but everyone knew that it could have been me, it could have been my brothers, it could have been anybody else. And we see, the more recently, the Islamophobia that continues to exist. There was a mass killing in Indianapolis just, a couple of weeks ago. And what we know now is that the Sikh community was targeted in there. The 8 people who were killed in that mass shooting, 4 of them were from the Sikh community. And so, yellow, brown, Asian Americans, the racism and intolerance of this time continues. This slide, I just want to say, it's not all about how Asian Americans have been attacked or subjected to racism. It's also about how Asian Americans have spoken up, have stood up. And so I just want to show some slides of the text slide that who is this man? This is from the 1800s. His name is Wong Kim Ark. Who is Wong Kim Ark? Everybody in America who comes from immigrant stock can thank Wong Kim Ark for the right to be an American citizen if you are born here. That was fought by Wong Kim Ark and the Chinese American community after the Exclusion Act of 1882, because he was born here. He fought for the right to be an American citizen, and he won it in the Supreme Court. And it's because of him that every other wave of immigrants can thank him. And who knows that? It's missing in history. And who also knows the fact that, you know, it's not that there was Asians here and Black people here. This is Frederick Douglass. What did he do? At that time of the Chinese Exclusion Act, he stood up and he said, the Chinese Exclusion Act is wrong. It's wrong for America. It's wrong for Black people in America. So I just want to put up these next few slides to show that, you know, there has been resistance. People have stood up for things that have benefited all Americans. And not only that, there's been a lot of interracial support. So we look at this slide of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, one of the marches over in Selma across the Pettus Bridge. There's a movie about that today. What are they wearing in the first row of the march across the bridge? They're wearing leis from Hawaii. Why? Because people from Hawaii came to participate in this march. You can see here, there's a slide. There's a banner on the slide showing the people from Hawaii who brought that. And not just those from Hawaii, there were Asian Americans who are alive today, who talk about being part of the freedom marches. But this is missing in history. This is the idea that Asians just sort of showed up, you know, yesterday and had nothing to do with the American story or American democracy. But these have been community activities, communities joining together in unity. So the United Farm Workers of America, that labor movement that we all sort of know that, okay, that involved Latinx people, but how many people know that it also involved Filipino farm workers who joined with, and in fact initiated the great grape boycott of the 1960s and 70s to come together with Cesar Chavez and the Latinx community. So these were multiracial movements with Asian Americans quite at the, you know, involved. And we talk about the Me Too movement, but how many of us recognize that in the women's liberation movement, the very first woman of color to be elected to Congress was an Asian American woman, Patsy Mink from Hawaii, who fought great sexism to even be able to run for office. And what did she do in her time of office? She fought valiantly for women's rights. And so Title IX can be, Patsy Mink can be thanked for that. She led Title IX. Title VII as well, the Equal Rights Amendment. Hawaii was the first state in the union to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, largely because of her leadership. But every girl in America who goes to public school and can play soccer or any sport can thank Patsy Mink for that contribution. And we see in the marriage equality movement, the right for women and men to marry, you know, the same gender. That first lawsuit came out of Hawaii with Pacific Islanders and Asian Americans who were named plaintiffs in that. And we see all over, you know, the support that has also come out of the Asian American and Asian community for the rights of people to be with who they love. So I wanted to include some of this and bring it to the current time, which is to say that, you know, there has been, when we talk about anti-Asian hate and the issue of conflict between Black and Asian communities, what we don't see in all of this is how the Black community, Jesse Jackson, for example, who actually was the first national leader to say that what happened to Vincent Chin was wrong. And here he is with Lily Chin. You know, after the mass killings in Atlanta, Jesse Jackson came out immediately to say that the anti-Asian hate is wrong. So did Stacey Abrams. So did Mayor Lance Bottoms in Atlanta. So did Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And if anybody takes any time to look at the social media kind of chat discussions, you'll see that there are many people who are not Asians who are coming out and saying, this is wrong, we have to do something. So I want to just point out that our challenges today is even as we are in an incredibly divided society that sees one community here, another community there, that actually we are all together. We have had a history of joint unity. And so even as we talk about allyship, to me, allyship comes from a place of difference. It's to say, you're my neighbor, but can we be allies? Unity is saying we belong in the same community. And Dr. Martin Luther King talked about the beloved community. And so if instead we say we are all part of the same community in Athens, at Ohio University, at wherever we are. And so we should find solutions that are about building our communities together. So I want to end there just to say that we have to have these visions of another world tomorrow, because this is the world we are already in today, that there is no majority race in America in at least 10 states in this country, and the rest of the country is rapidly going to be there within you students, your lifetimes. I say within the next 10, 15 years, we will pass that milestone. So this is what I want to leave you with, images of Asian voices standing up to raise our voices. And this is what we need to do today. So with that, I'm going to stop the share, and I'm sorry I didn't speak as fast as I wanted to, but I'd like to turn it over to your questions now.
Thank you, Helen. This talk is very inspirational. My name is Li Jinyang. I'm an associate professor. I'm Asian woman faculty as well in the Department of Counseling and Higher Education, Patton College of Education. So I'm the facilitator of the Q&A session. I already received one question earlier. So the first question is, can you speak to the different ways we as AAPI folks can work in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement? There have been clashes between these two communities, especially with older generations. How can we continue to work towards collaboration rather than being shaped by white supremacist system that keep us separated?
So yes, that is a very important question. And in fact, that's why I devoted a number of my slides to show that actually this idea that Asian and Black communities can't come together is false, because we have a history of having done that. But the problem is that we have all been deprived of that knowledge. We have, and I say deprived because, it's not an accident that K through 12 in America, or in American history, or in the kind of things we see in Hollywood really show that there really is no, interaction or unity that has existed. News is a business. News sells about conflict. That's why every night on the news, all you see are terrible things, because that's what draws viewers or readers. And even online, I'm sad to say that, it's how many hits do you get? And so telling stories of how people have come together, like how the Reverend Jackson has spoken up, or how Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Stacey Abrams and so forth, that doesn't make news. Why is that? Well, see, that's the thing that we all have to decolonize and detoxify our own minds. So we have to get rid of those assumptions. And so within the Asian American community and, Asians who are recent immigrants here, they don't know, many do not know our own histories, the histories of struggle of other communities, do not know about civil rights, do not know anything about 1619 and the history of how human beings from Africa were enslaved, or about the genocide of Native American people. So, and how Asian Americans fit into the white supremacy structure. And so as long as we, and by that I mean all of us who care, people of conscience, as long as we are ignorant and we have to admit our ignorance because, you know, that is something that has been enforced upon us. As long as we admit that and say, we have to learn how people in the past have worked together. And why is it today that we can't? And if we cannot come together, we will not be able to end the anti-Asian hate. We will not be able to really create a world where Black Lives Matter. We will not be able to end any of this violence. You know, we will not be able to disrupt and change white supremacy. It will require all of us. So I think in Asian American communities, there's often a feeling like, well, what I experience is micro. It's a microaggression. How can I even show up? And so, or if I show up, it's just like, let me, you know, be a supporting ally, or or be there. You know, yes, it's important to be there, but come there knowing that you too are a warrior that has to take on racism, structural racism, to know something about the history, you know, as much as you can. So your own history, as well as what is happening to other communities. You know, why is there a Black Lives Matter movement? What is 1619? What does it mean to be Asian in America when people assume that if you're Asian, you're white, and to not buy into that? So, you know, I show some of these slides to say that, you know, Asian Americans have a proud history of fighting racism in this country too. It's just that nobody knows it. You know, nobody knows it, not even Asian Americans. So we have to begin to assert that. So we have a place to fight too. You know, this is our fight. You know, Black Lives Matter is an Asian American fight. We cannot end anti-Asian hate as long as there is violence to Black people and racism to Black people, brown people, red people. You know, all people of conscience really have to find a way to come together. That is the only way we will end racism in America. So that's what I would say. We have a lot to disrupt, to change, you know, detoxify our own minds, detoxify our communities, and there's work to be done in every community. So.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what do you want to tell the international students who are looking forward to study over abroad, but see this anti-Asian hate crimes happening in the United States?
Well, I think it does go, as the first question was, to education, to gaining self-knowledge. I think that, you know, I taught abroad, and I know that, you know, the images of America that go abroad are often, you know, very filtered. They're either very rosy, or there are, you know, scary things like, you know, anti-Asian hate. But for the most part, it's, you know, Meiguo in Chinese means beautiful country. And so, I think, and I actually worry about international students who don't have the knowledge of the dynamics that, you know, exist in a completely different culture, about some of the images I showed on what is assumed about Asian people, you know, being a gook, a geek, or a geisha, and just don't have that cultural awareness. And it would be the same of an American going to another country, just really not being able to read what the culture, what's happening, you know. So I do think for international students who come to Ohio University or anywhere else, I think I really wish there was a primer, and maybe that does exist, but a primer, an orientation, not to scare people, but to just, you know, alert them to, especially if you're an Asian student today, international student, to sort of know you're walking into a time that is highly explosive. You do need to be aware. You don't need to be afraid, but you need to be aware. You, not to, you know, yes, people are friendly. There are friends to be made, but do know that some people who know nothing might see you in a certain way, and that we are in an inflammatory time. I think all of those things, you know, even without this COVID hate that we're living through, these have always been issues. I think female students, international students, really need to be aware of the gendered way that racism is expressed. And, you know, there are unfortunately a lot of case studies one could look at times when things have gone really wrong, not just for Asian women students, but also Asian men students. So that's another topic. But, you know, if any of you want to know more, and Dr. Yang or Dr. Zhang or the school, you know, I can certainly supply some of those names and stories that people can look up. But it begins with education.
Yes. Hi, Helen. I know your time is very precious, unlimited. I received many great questions. And I want to ask the co-hosts, how long can we permit for a few more questions?
Maybe can we have one or two more? Then
yes, yes. I'm sorry for those people who emailed me the questions. I cannot run all the questions. I can only add the questions in the order I received. So I saw good comments about the collaboration between K-12 and college. So I want to jump to this question. Probably that's addressed a lot of people's questions as well. So Helen, can you share some ideas about how we can organize as a university for outreach and promotion of multicultural education to our K-12 schools?
Yes, though, that's a great question, because it really does need to begin much younger. And, you know, I run into so many students who, like me, it's not until you're a university student or college student that you say, wow, how come I never knew this? And
am I the only person who can't hear?
Yeah, I think we lost the sound.
Right. Helen, can you repeat the last few sentences? Thank you.
And actually, you're muted right now, Miss Helen. Let's try one more time.
Yeah. We can still.
Can you hear you? I don't know what happened.
No, cannot hear. Sorry.
hello, can you hear me now?
Yes. Good. There we go. There we go. Great.
I don't know what I did, but I'm sorry about that. Anyway, so K through 12, yes, it really must begin there, and actually even preschool. And so, yes, there are books available. There are, you know, I mean, I don't know what sort of partnership already exists, you know, between the university community as well as the, you know, school boards and the K through 12. But if they already exist, that would be a great way to kind of use those channels to suggest curricula, you know. There are so many books that are available for young kids, young adult books. There is, for example, a television series called The Asian Americans on PBS, and a number of educational documentary series that can be used and shown in classrooms that also come with curricula in there that teachers can use to have sessions to talk about those things. But, you know, there may be ways to have, what do you call it, teacher education sessions, you know, that Ohio University sponsors, that some of your staff who know this history and cultural and informational things, where some of the international students, for example, can also add to the understanding, you know, that teachers might need to know. And so I just think there are a lot of opportunities, you know, for university, college, higher ed and K through 12 partnerships. One thing that we are finding is in this anti-Asian hate, so many Asian parents are terrified as schools open up to send their kids to school, because we know that children are being bullied and targeted, and Asian kids actually always have been because of these things I showed, but now the statistics are showing that a lot of the anti-Asian bullying of children is being committed by adults who seek out the playground or see a kid and then verbally assault them or worse. And so many parents around the country are either pulling their kids out of school or approaching their school boards to say, what are you doing? And getting, no reaction from their school boards, who are saying, you know what, it's a challenge enough for us to open the schools. We can't deal with this too. So I think that there are, it's going to take the voices of many people to stand up and say, no, our children's safety is paramount. And so there's, I think, a lot of room for partnerships, and it would be great to see maybe Ohio University can, and the school districts of Athens can really model something for the rest of the country.
Can I ask one more question, co-hosts? Just one quick question, Helen. So the audience asked this question. Actually, I'm interested in that as well. So the foreign relations, especially the relation between China and the United States, affects the status and the living situation of AAPIs in the United States. So Republicans tended to scapegoat AAPIs for kind of the virus spreading. So, and still when the Democrats went up stage, it's still kind of the foreign relationships is still in conflict. So how can we deal with the politics and international relations current now?
That is a very large and overarching question, I think, not just for the US and Asians in America, but US-China relations is going to dominate global politics. And there's a lot of conversation about whether the Cold War that has been heating up could eventually end up as a hot war, meaning a military confrontation, whether it's between US and China or surrogate kind of conflicts in the South China Sea or somewhere in the Pacific. And those are all very scary prospects. And this is not new either. Yes, they definitely contribute to the anti-Asian hate, even though the vast majority of people who have been attacked, in this anti-China period, that began with all the anti-China rhetoric, were not Chinese, just as Vincent Chin was not Japanese. The majority of people attacked in these 4,000 or plus incidents are not Chinese. But, the anti-China, what I call it, anti-China cycle that we're in right now really is a few decades old. I showed you that slide from 1997. It was already intensifying then. And so what can be done? Well, we are in a period of a lot of nationalism around the globe. So many countries with demagogues. We, in my opinion, had one in the last administration. So here in the US, the best we can do is to, again, I guess, go back to educate and be organized and speak up to say, you know what, this is not going in a good direction. This is not good for any of us. Can we find ways to at least begin to understand people? The majority of Americans can't find the Pacific Ocean on a map, let alone find China. So what they know of China is like very little. And in China, there's a highly nationalist, government there right now. And so what the Chinese people get about America is also filtered. And so none of that is good. And if there are ways that we can find, to enhance, global communications, constructive dialogue, here in America to increase understanding of other people. There's a lot more I could say about this. I have actually taught you know, at universities in China. And I know that you can't paint 1.4 billion people as all the same. There are people in China who disagree with the policies that are there. And so to assume that all Chinese people are the enemy is also a big mistake. But that's where we have to begin, by understanding each other's humanity. And if we can understand that, it will make us less likely to want to send a nuclear bomb, or to beat somebody to death with a baseball bat, or to have police shooting somebody and killing them over a traffic possible violation. All of those things begin with seeing each other's humanity. And I'm sorry to be such a long talker, you know, but I do want to just say that kind of education and knowledge comes from what you are doing right now at Ohio University. And I'm just very honored to be here with you to talk about these things.
I'm honored as well. Thank you, Helen, for a great insight. And thank you for the audience for the great questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, again, for your powerful and so impactful presentation. I'm just so blown away. I think it's going to take some time to really process it. And I strongly, you know, want to argue that we should make your presentation as a core, you know, part of our curriculum. You know, not only Ohio University, but K-12 in our community. We really have to educate ourselves, our community, our children, and our, you know, coworkers. And, you know, bring that unity in our community is really the way to go. And among all the chats, I wish we have this button that you can like those chats, but unfortunately, you know, we don't do that. But one of the comments that really caught my attention from Dean Middleton, thank you for your insight, that if we are to be anti-racist, it requires we do more than just express outrage. It requires action on the part of each individual, and outrage is not an action. So I completely agree with that statement. And you know, before we break out into our small group, again, I want to thank Helen and Dr. Li Jingyang for your facilitation. I really appreciate it.